Nothing about that Saturday felt like a night that would leave a permanent fracture in my family. It was July 18th, 2026. The evening air over downtown Chicago was heavy, thick with the kind of midsummer humidity that rolls off Lake Michigan and settles deep into the brickwork of the city streets. My name is Arthur Vance. I'm 66 years old, and for 34 years, I worked as the Chief Logistics Manager and Compliance Inspector for the commercial container yards over at the Chicago International Rail Terminal. When you spend more than 3 decades calculating axle loads, tracking shipping manifests, and organizing the precision movement of 200-ton freight cars, you learn to look at life through the lens of structural balance. You learn that when an entire train derails, it isn't because of a sudden, random act of God. It happens because a hairline crack in a single switching rail was ignored for years while the weight kept piling on top of it. That evening, I was sitting behind the wheel of my 10-year-old Ford F-150, the engine idling quietly as I waited in the commercial loading lane directly behind the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel. My hands still smelled faintly of industrial degreaser and cold iron. I had spent the last 5 hours down at the terminal's private freight bay, manually verifying the customs clearance codes for 3 overdue shipping crates containing premium European wool and hand-carved loom fittings. Indeed, the core inventory for my daughter-in-law Cynthia's high-end textile and home decor brand, Vance International. Without those specific crates, her big 3rd anniversary gallery gala tonight would have had nothing but empty display tables. I'd pulled 3 separate favors with the Port Authority's night dispatchers just to get those containers released before the weekend lockdown. Once the last crate was safely unloaded into the hotel's service elevator, I parked my truck near the alley entrance, wiped the dust off my face, and pulled my best charcoal jacket over my work shirt. I walked toward the front entrance where the red carpet stretched across the sidewalk under the bright white gallery lights. I was about 20 feet from the glass canopy when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Cynthia. "Dad, Julian said he saw your truck by the service alley. Please don't come up to the main lobby level tonight. We have the senior acquisition editors from the New York design firms arriving in 10 minutes, and the whole evening is structured around a specific, minimalist high-end brand image. Your current warehouse appearance just doesn't fit the elite media profile we're projecting for the label. Julian left a ticket voucher at the lower concierge desk so you can watch the product launch video via the live stream on your tablet. Okay? Thanks for understanding." So I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still on the edge of the sidewalk, the cold digital glow of the screen reflecting off my glasses while a limousine pulled up to the carpet, spilling out a crowd of young executives laughing and adjusting their tailored evening coats. I didn't send a furious reply. I didn't storm through the front doors to make a scene in front of her media guests. When a massive steel coupling pins a freight car to the track under thousands of pounds of pressure, it doesn't shout. It just holds the weight in total silence until the release pin is drawn. Before I share what happened, please comment below and let me know where you're joining us from. And if this is your first time here, welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. I turned around, walked back to my truck, and placed the manila folder containing the signed customs clearance logs onto the dashboard. I put the F-150 in gear and drove west, away from the glittering lights of the lakefront Gala, moving toward the dark, industrial outline of the old canal shipping lanes where the rail lines cut through the city's edge. Here is the exact truth that Cynthia and my son Julian had completely omitted from their calculations. They believed Vance International was a product of her brilliant aesthetic vision and his master's degree in business strategy. They truly believed that the luxury address on Granville Avenue and the premium shelf placement in the Midwest department stores were achievements they had earned entirely on their own merit. They had no idea that 3 years ago, when Cynthia's initial startup loan was rejected by every commercial credit union in Cook County, I was the one who went to First National Bank. I didn't just sign a piece of paper. I had my private retirement asset holding company, Vance Logistics LLC, place 3 separate commercial warehouse properties, and my personal liquid reserve accounts on the line as an unconditional cross-collateral warranty to back their corporate black cards and their raw inventory credit facilities. More than that, the actual freight, by, and the custom-cleared dock space where her importing business operated did not belong to the hotel or the city. It was operated under an exclusive commercial lease deed held by Vance Logistics, LLC. I had quietly allowed them to use my corporate license, my terminal clearance codes, and my 40% union discount on rail freight without ever sending them an invoice. I did it because I thought I was pouring a solid foundation for my son's future. I did it because my late wife, Clara, had made me promise that I would always use my strength to keep our boy from knowing the heavy, bone-deep exhaustion of the lowland docks. I pulled my truck onto the gravel shoulder of the old river road, right next to a weathered, chain-link fence overlooking the dark water of the shipping canal. Frank DeLuca, my old safety inspector and closest friend for 35 years, was already waiting there, sitting on the tailgate of his own vehicle with a thermos of black coffee between his boots. He looked at my face, then at the quiet, unread text message still glowing on my dashboard. "Arthur," Frank said, pouring a cup of the steaming coffee, "the Hotel Gala started 20 minutes ago. Why are you sitting out here by the water? The gala is for the elite media." "Frank," I said, stepping out of the cab and leaning against the cold steel of my truck bed. "They told me my look ruins the brand." Frank didn't shout. He didn't drop his coffee cup. He just stared out at the dark silhouette of the container cranes rising like heavy iron skeletons against the distant city skyline. I reached into my canvas bag on the passenger seat and pulled out a small, old object. It was a heavy, industrial lead seal press made of blackened cast steel. The year 1993 was deeply stamped into the metal handle near the heavy crimping die. It was the exact tool the Port Authority had handed me 33 years ago on the morning I took over the main terminal yard as head manager. I balanced the heavy steel tool in my hand. Cynthia looked at this tool when we were organizing her inventory storage last month. I told Frank, my voice dropping to room temperature. She told Julian to hide it in the back room because it looked like rustic junk from a bygone era. She said she didn't want her upscale clients thinking her family came from the Benbai. "She's forgetting who owns the tracks under her train." "Arthur," Frank muttered, his voice tight. "She didn't forget, Frank," I replied, watching the low red lights of a distant cargo barge move slowly down the canal. "She just assumed the bridge would hold her weight forever, no matter how much dirt she kicked down on the people who built the pylons." I pulled out my laptop, flipped it open on the hood of the F-150, and logged directly into the private corporate portal of Vance Logistics, LLC. The evening air over Granville Avenue was heavy with the familiar midsummer humidity of a Chicago July. I parked my F-150 near the shipping canal, the truck's engine cooling down with a faint, rhythmic pinging sound that matched the slow pulse of the barge lights on the water. Frank DeLuca took a slow sip from his thermos, his eyes fixed on the laptop glowing on my truck's hood. On the screen, the system terminal for Vance Logistics LLC was open, displaying the raw operational data for Cynthia's brand. "You're not just pausing a shipment, Arthur," Frank said, his voice dropping into that low, serious register he used when a rail line was compromised. "You're pulling the pin on her entire holiday quarter. If those 14 containers don't clear the yard by Monday noon, her retail contracts go belly up." "A Chui Kungkung doesn't fail because of one bad day, Frank," I said, my voice staying at room temperature. "It fails because the people running it believe the freight moves on hot air and media profiles instead of iron and signatures." I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold, heavy handle of the 1993 lead seal press. The stamped numbers on the steel die felt smooth under my thumb, a physical reminder of 34 years spent managing loads that my son and his wife now treated like a rustic background decoration. To understand why I clicked that confirmation box on the canal road, you have to look at the gears that had been turning 3 months prior. You have to look at the afternoon I walked into their minimalist corporate headquarters on Granville Avenue. It was a Tuesday in April. I had driven over from the terminal after helping a crew retrack a jammed lumber car. My work shirt was smudged with dry grease, and my boots carried the faint grit of the limestone ballast from the yard tracks. I had a manila folder under my arm containing the updated carrier liability waivers documents that required my personal corporate stamp as the master leaseholder of their storage bin by. When I stepped out of the elevator into the third-floor office, the reception area was immaculate. Polished concrete floors, white linen walls, and a custom walnut desk that cost more than my first 3 service vehicles combined. Cynthia was standing near the glass conference room wall, reviewing a digital presentation with 2 interior buyers from a major Midwest department store chain. My son, Julian, was beside her, holding an iPad and nodding with that anxious, deferential posture he'd developed ever since he stopped working with his hands. As I stepped toward the counter to leave the folder, Cynthia's eyes flicked over the glass partition. She didn't wave. Her face went stiff at the temples, the precise look of a gallery director discovering a grease leak on a display wall. She excused herself from the buyers, stepped through the glass door, and intercepted me before I could reach the inner hallway. "Arthur," she said, her voice dropping into a hushed, sharp whisper that didn't carry past the walnut desk. "What are you doing up here right now? I told Julian we had the regional acquisition team in the building all afternoon. The port insurance writers needed a signature before the 5 o'clock courier run." "Cynthia," I said, setting the folder down. "Without the waiver, the night shift won't unload your premium wool crates." She looked at the folder, then her eyes dropped to the reception desk. There, resting near a ceramic vase containing dried pampas grass, was my 1993 lead seal press. Julian had borrowed it the week before to crimp some copper hanging wires for their showroom displays. Cynthia reached out, picked up the heavy iron tool by the handle, and slipped it into a lower desk drawer, out of sight from the glass conference room. "Julian needs to stop leaving this industrial junk on the floor," she muttered, her fingers smoothing the walnut wood where the iron had rested. "Our clients are paying for a premium lifestyle brand, Arthur. Having a rusted taco tool sitting next to our lookbooks makes the company look like a backyard operation. It ruins the aesthetic we're projecting." I looked at my daughter-in-law. She was 31 years old, perfectly polished, her hands soft from years of design consulting. She was looking at the tool that had secured the very freight lines that kept her inventory moving, and she called it an eyesore. Julian walked out of the conference room then, his eyes darting between me and his wife. He saw my grease-stained jacket, saw the folder on the desk, and he chose his position before a single question was asked. "Dad, if these are just the standard port clearances, you can leave them with the building concierge downstairs from now on," Julian said, his voice carrying that defensive, rehearsed clip. "We're transitioning the logistics data to an automated system next month anyway. We don't really need you driving over in the middle of a buyer review. It disrupts the flow of the presentation." "The flow of your presentation doesn't clear customs, Julian," I said, my voice staying flat. "We appreciate the help, Arthur," Cynthia interrupted, her hand already hovering near the elevator call button, guiding me toward the exit with the polite efficiency of a security guard clearing a restricted zone. "But we're operating at a different tier now. The brand has moved past the old dockyard methods. We'll have our accounts manager email you if we need any more terminal access." I stepped into the elevator cab. The brushed steel doors slid shut, cutting off the scent of their expensive espresso and the sight of my son turning back to his buyers with a smile that wasn't his own. They truly believed the line of credit was a result of Cynthia's marketing genius. They genuinely thought the showroom on Granville Avenue was a structure they had built by themselves. They had completely forgotten whose name was on the master deed for the Ben Buy, and whose personal assets were keeping the bank from calling their commercial notes. And as I sat on the tailgate of my truck 3 months later, watching the text from Cynthia go dark on the dashboard, I knew the load was about to hit the fracture. The glow from the laptop screen was the only sharp light left on the river road. Outside the cabin of my F-150, the hum of the city felt distant, filtered through the heavy summer air and the steady, low idle of Frank's truck parked a few feet away. On the screen, the cursor blinked against the secure dashboard of the Cook County Commercial Registry and the private terminal network. It was 9:42 p.m. In the ballroom at the Drake Hotel, the music was probably swelling, and the servers were likely pouring the third round of champagne for the regional distributors. My phone buzzed on the truck hood. A photo popped up in the family group chat. It was Julian, wearing a tuxedo that still had the tailor's temporary basting threads tucked neatly inside the shoulder seams, another detail he'd overlooked in his rush to look the part. He was standing next to Cynthia, who was holding a glass of white wine, her arm linked with the vice president of the Midwest Retail Syndicate. Beneath the photo, Julian had typed, "The $2.3 million milestone is locked in. The buyers are completely blown away by the presentation. Thanks for staying out of the way tonight, Dad. It really allowed the brand identity to breathe." I didn't open the text thread. I didn't send a reply. I just looked at the photo until the screen timed out and left me in the gray twilight of the shipping canal. "They're signing the core distribution rider on Monday morning," Frank said, his thumb tracing the rim of his plastic coffee cup. He wasn't looking at the laptop. He was looking at a 300-foot coal barge clearing the second lockdown river. "If you do this tonight, Arthur, that bank protocol triggers automatically at midnight. The system won't wait for Monday." "I know the schedule, Frank," I said, my voice staying flat, even, room temperature. "When a switcher rail is warped, you don't wait for the engine to hit the curve before you flag the line. You drop the red light immediately." I turned back to the keyboard. My attorney, David Fox, had done his work with the precise, bloodless efficiency that only 30 years of commercial contract law can produce. The legal structure behind Vance International wasn't a vault. It was a series of connected chambers, and I held the master key to the primary seal. For 3 years, Cynthia's inventory had moved through the international terminal under the commercial clearing license of Vance Logistics, LLC. Under Section 14, subsection D of the original yard agreement, a piece of standard boilerplate they had signed without reading during their first spring transition, the primary license holder retained the absolute, unilateral right to suspend bend-by clearance and invoke a mandatory technical inventory audit if the underlying corporate guarantor detected an unauthorized shift in asset-to-debt distribution. Cynthia had spent $85,000 of corporate credit on the Gala alone, classifying it as brand infrastructure investment. But on the bank's ledger, that expense had pushed her active operating account below the Tier 1 liquid reserve floor required by the bank to maintain my cross-collateral warranty. I positioned the cursor over the final submittal box. Notice of material non-compliance and immediate suspension of terminal access rights. I pressed the Enter key. The screen went white for half a second as the encrypted filing went through to the Port Authority's automated night desk and the compliance department at First National Bank. "What's the lag time?" Frank asked, setting his thermos down on the tailgate with a soft clink. "What?" "The port dispatch logs the freeze immediately," I told him, closing the laptop case down until the latch clicked. "The 14 containers holding her autumn wool stock are sitting in Bay 4 right now. As of 10 o'clock my P, the digital manifest is locked. No carrier truck can pull them past the main gate without a manual override stamp from my office. And the bank. The bank's risk management algorithm updates at midnight on the third Saturday of the month," I said, looking down at my old work shoes. "When the clock turns, the system will register that Vance Logistics, LLC has withdrawn its unconditional cross-collateral guarantee for their commercial credit lines. The corporate black cards will show a $0 limit before the cleaning staff at the hotel finishes picking up the empty champagne flutes." Frank let out a short, dry breath that was almost a laugh, then stopped. "Julian's going to come apart, Arthur. He's your boy." He's 33 years old. Frank," I said, reaching into the truck bed to retrieve my canvas tool bag. "I spent 34 years making sure the floor beneath his feet didn't shake. I thought I was teaching him how to build a house. Turns out, I was just teaching him how to look down on the toe-co who laid the brickwork. It's time for him to feel the actual weight of the gravity he's been ignoring. My phone rang 2 minutes later. The screen lit up with Julian's name. I didn't reach for it. It rang out, went to voicemail, and then started again 30 seconds later with Cynthia's number. I picked up the 1993 lead seal press from the hood of the truck and placed it inside the metal toolbox behind the cab. I turned the padlock, snapped the shackle shut, and slipped the key into my pocket. The lake breeze was turning cooler now, carrying the sharp metallic tang of the rail yard and the smell of wet timber from the riverbanks. Across the water, the distant skyscrapers of the loop stood bright and oblivious against the dark sky, a multi-billion-dollar grid of concrete and glass that ran on thousands of invisible contracts, thousands of quiet agreements, and the steady, uncredited labor of men who didn't fit the brand profile. "Let's go get some pie, Frank," I said, stepping into the driver's seat of the F-150. Monday morning is coming, and the train is exactly on schedule. Monday morning in the Pearl District didn't care about the elite media or the champagne hangovers from the night before. The office of Vance International was filled with that bright, sterile north light that looks beautiful in design magazines, but offers absolutely no place for a lie to hide. I wasn't at the office. I was down at my old workshop behind the house in Newark, the grease-stained garage where I'd spent my evenings for 30 years fixing things that other people had given up on. I was standing by the workbench, using a piece of oil-soaked rag to clean the threads of a heavy hydraulic fitting. At 10:14 a.m., a vehicle pulled up outside the Suong. It wasn't the least European sedan Bob usually favored. It was a standard yellow city cab, and the doors slammed with that sharp, hollow tin sound that tells you someone didn't wait for the vehicle to stop before they reached for the handle. Cynthia walked through the garage door first. Her hair was pulled back, but the polished, unbothered composure I'd seen on her social media layout was completely gone. She was holding her designer document bag against her chest like a shield, her face the exact color of frozen lake ice. Julian followed a half-step behind her, his tailored jacket unbuttoned, his tie tucked into his pocket, looking like a man who had just watched his train leave the station while he was still holding the cargo manifest. "Arthur," Cynthia said, her voice carrying a sharp, ragged edge that didn't belong in a luxury showroom. "What did you do to the port terminal logs?" The regional acquisition directors from the department store chain were standing at the loading bay with our senior clearing agents 20 minutes ago. The central inventory database flagged our entire autumn container shipment as an unverified security risk. The harbor dispatch refused to let a single carrier truck pass the main gate. I didn't stop wiping the fitting. I didn't look up from the iron threads. "The harbor dispatch is just following the protocol, Cynthia," I said, keeping my voice at room temperature. Section 14, subsection D. When the underlying asset foundation is removed, the system pauses for inspection. It's a standard safety measure. "Dad." Julian stepped forward, his voice cracking on the one syllable, exactly the way it did when he was 12 years old and had dropped my best socket wrench down the shipyard grating. "The bank just froze our corporate lines. They said the cross-collateral warranty from Vance Logistics LLC was rescinded at midnight on Saturday. The buyers from the syndicate, they saw the system red flags on the inventory screens. They canceled the distribution contract. They think we're running a fraudulent shell company." I set the hydraulic fitting down on the wooden bench. I turned around slowly, reached into my canvas work jacket, and pulled out the heavy lead seal press from 1993. I set the blackened steel tool on the counter between us, right next to the oil can. "You told me 3 months ago that this tool was rustic junk from a bygone era, Cynthia," I said, looking her directly in the eye. My voice even, measured, and completely devoid of heat. "You told my son that my third co-appearance made your upscale clients uncomfortable. You said your lifestyle brand had moved past the old dockyard methods." "Arthur, that was just we were under immense pressure for the product launch." Cynthia stammered, her fingers tightening around the edge of her leather bag. "It was a corporate branding decision. It wasn't personal. Everything about a structure is personal. Cynthia, I told her, my voice dropping another degree. The signature that authorized your credit cards was personal. The commercial lease on Granville Avenue that allowed your brand to exist below market cost, that was personal too. I spent 3 years being the invisible labor behind your elite image, because I promised Julian's mother I'd build a floor beneath his feet that wouldn't shake. But you didn't just walk on the floor, Cynthia. You decided the man who poured the foundation didn't have the right look to sit at your table. Dad, please. Julian's shoulders dropped, his eyes wet, looking around the cluttered, greasy garage like he was looking for the version of his childhood that used to live here. We owe the suppliers $85,000 for the Gala alone. The bank is going to liquidate our personal assets if we don't restore the cross guarantee by 5 o'clock. We're family. You can't just walk away from your own blood. I'm not walking away out of anger. Julian, I said, picking up the 1993 seal press and placing it back into the heavy iron toolbox behind me. I'm relieving the load. When a system is carrying too much entitlement on top of a rotten pylon, the engineer doesn't keep adding weight. He cuts the connection so the structure can find its true equilibrium. I closed the heavy metal lid of the toolbox. The latch clicked shut with a sound that was final, cold, and entirely unhurried. Your attorney can contact David Fox regarding the 60-day transition layout for the office space. I told them, turning back toward my workbench, the cross guarantee is finished. The assets have already been transferred into an irrevocable maritime scholarship trust for the children of the container terminal workers. The account is closed. Cynthia didn't scream. She didn't flip a table. She just stood there in the dust of my workshop, realizing for the very first time in her life that her aesthetic vision had absolutely no value when the concrete underneath it belonged to someone else. She turned around and walked out into the hot New Jersey sun, her heels crunching unevenly against the gravel driveway. Julian stayed for 3 seconds, staring at my back, waiting for the pause, waiting for the soft look that had rescued him from every bad choice he'd made since high school. I didn't look back. I picked up my collet, adjusted the torque setting, and went back to work on the hydraulic valve. I heard the shop door click shut. 2 months later, the sign on Granville Avenue came down. The luxury lifestyle brand Vance International dissolved into a liquidator's inventory spreadsheet. Its assets sold off to satisfy the outstanding vendor debts. Julian took a position as a mid-level manager for a regional trucking fleet in Ohio, and Cynthia returned to freelance consulting. Her social media feed suddenly quiet, empty of the red carpet galas and the elite media profiles. It is now October 2026. The autumn winds are starting to turn sharp, blowing the cold gray water of the canal against the timber pilings of the Newark docks. I'm sitting on the tailgate of my Ford F-150 with Frank DeLuca, a thermos of black coffee resting between our boots. Across the channel, a massive black container vessel is clearing the deep water gate, its engines humming with a low, heavy vibration that you can feel straight through the steel frame of the truck. You think he'll ever call you back? Arthur. Frank asks, watching the ship's radar array turn against the gray sky. Maybe, Frank, I say, taking a slow sip from my plastic cup. But if he does, it won't be to ask for a signature on a commercial line. It'll be because he finally figured out that the ground beneath a man's boots doesn't stay solid by itself. I reach back, touch the padlock on my iron toolbox, and look out at the shipping lane. The structure is balanced. The load is exactly where it belongs. And for the first time in 3 long years, the silence down here by the water feels completely earned. At the end of my journey, I have one question left for you to consider in the comments below. At what point does a parent's constant sacrifice cross the line from helping a child build a future into enabling the very ungratefulness that will eventually destroy them? Where do you draw your own boundary?